Welcome to the Foundry, where leaders are forged daily. And now your host, George Roberts.
Welcome back, entrepreneurs. Today, we welcome Tamara Jones, founder of Bucket List Stays. And she's coming to us today from Punta Cana. In one of her units, the Pandora's Soul, which I believe was inspired by the movie Avatar. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. Well, I always love to get the real estate story out of entrepreneurs. This is an entrepreneurial podcast, but we love real estate. So tell us, how did you get into real estate? What was your start? And how did you end up scaling to where you're at today?
Okay, well, I want to first tell you, thank you for inviting me on your show, George. I really enjoyed this podcast. We have some mutual friends in common, so it's really an honor to be here with you. And thank you again for creating such a space that, entrepreneurs like me can come on and share our stories. I'll tell you, I got started back in 2015, and it wasn't anything that I was intentionally doing as far as getting into real estate. I was always interested in real estate, but I never knew how to step into real estate. And this kind of just happened where I was a paralegal for the federal government at the time, came out of the military and needed some extra income. There was a pay cut there, believe it or not. I was getting paid more because I was coming from Hawaii when I was in the service, and you get paid a lot more there. So I took a pretty big pay cut going into the federal government, and I decided to take one of my rooms in a home that I had in a place called Dunwoody, Georgia, and put that on Airbnb. Now, back then, Airbnb wasn't so sexy. It was just something where people took some little flip phone photos and put them up there, and they just got going. It wasn't the professional machine it is today. But when I put my room up, it blew me away, the amount of money that I was making. I literally was covering my mortgage with that one room. So that one room was covering my mortgage, and I couldn't believe that a room was doing that, just a single room. So it got me curious on what does this entire unit, if you're doing this with a room and you're able to cover, bills like your mortgage, what can you do with the entire unit? And also, I didn't know how to use an entire. I always knew how to gain an entire unit for myself, but I didn't know how to gain a unit as a short-term rental for investment purposes. So that plunged me into looking for mentorship, classes, whatever I could, get my hands on. And I feverishly went through YouTube, grabbing as much YouTube University information I could and things like that, until I ran into via a platform called Fiverr, a coach. His name was Coach 𝐓𝐚𝐽 𝐉𝐵 at the time. And at the time, I talked to him about what I already had established. And he graciously invited me to learn a little bit more, but I ended up working for him in his company. Because I knew how to do permits and things like that. So I ended up sourcing for his company permits and things like that. And that kind of expanded, his business and my knowledge of this business, in order for me to be able to go independent once it was time for me to move on and do my own sourcing and things like that for my own company. So that's how I got into it. A lot of mistakes made early on, when I first started, even not reaching out to my coach all the time. I remember the second unit I ended up getting was because I went door to door, almost like a Girl Scout selling cookies. I was going door to door, trying to find a place in a area called Tybee Island, which I still have that unit, going door to door instead of really learning how to source properly. But yeah, those are some successful fails that I had early on in this business.
Great. Well, I love how you describe that the short-term rental business wasn't sexy when you got into it, because, it sure is now. And it seems like everybody thinks that they know how to run a short-term rental, even if they don't, even if they never have. And there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, One of the things that I like the most about it is the design element. I mean, I can see you are in one of your units here in beautiful Dominican Republic. It looks like, I don't know if you got the windows open, it looks like the wind is just blowing through. And I could just imagine what it's like to go there as a destination and spend some time. So what are some of the tricks, or what separates the best in your business from the also rans?
Oh, that's a good question, George. I'm gonna tell you that's a good question. I'll tell you first of all, to even go before we get to, design, because that is one of the things that sets you apart. It's also taking a business very seriously. And I picked that up with colleagues and peers going through the COVID downturn in the economy. I saw so many people just let their units go, just let them drop. But that's the part of this business, is going with the ups and the downs of the economy and being prepared to try to get through and weather, the storm as best as you can. We lost one unit during that period in Clearwater, which was because we stood the unit up in November, and then COVID hit in like January. It was just too young to sustain that kind of hit. So I would say the first thing that sets you apart is taking the business serious. If you're in the business, you're in it. And you want to make sure you're honoring your contracts, and you want to make sure that you're operating out here honorably. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would tell you, it is, again, going back to treating it as a business. If you don't invest into the unit, you will sink amongst the competition. There's so much stiff competition now. It was not back in 2015. If you look around, everybody's unit looks great. So you can't afford not to bring in a designer, you can't afford not to stage it properly, and you can't afford not to have professional photos done. You just will get lost in the competition. So everybody thinks, oh, if I just price it right, or maybe even if I'm just in the right location, which will get you, far, location will get you far. But when you come up to where competition and where to have people stop scrolling, you want people to stop scrolling when they're looking, you must have your unit staged, and I would even say branded properly. So even having the name, so all of our units have names. This unit is Pandora Soul. We have the Relentless Raven. We have Grandma's Creole Cottage in New Orleans. Those names stand out to people, and when they refer back to them, they call them by their names. So that's another thing we use as something to stand out amongst the competition. But love that question, but it mainly is to treat it as a business.
Well, I'm glad you love the question, because I love your answer even better. As Charles Dobbins said in the previous episode of the Foundry, that success is a lousy teacher. So I appreciate that you're willing to just come right out here and roll with the punches and keep it real. Yes, your business is a fascinating one to me, because it is very design oriented. I mean, you get a huge edge. I've been to short-term rentals that have maybe survived just because of the location, because there's a great big demand. But the ones that really stand out, of course, those are the ones that are themed. And I'm glad that you mentioned the Relentless Raven, because that's one of the ones that I wanted to ask you about, not only because I think that it's very fascinating. I have stayed in rooms that had a literary theme, and I appreciate that, but also because you got some amazing press on that too. So why don't you first tell us about the amazing product that generated that press? And then I want to ask you more about your press contacts too.
I gotta tell you that I always knew from the beginning, and people say, I didn't know it was, I always knew the Relentless Raven was going to be a star. And I'll tell you, it didn't even start off that way. It actually started off in a really bad start. And I'll tell you about it, because that's the way we learn, and as much as we can in these circles, share some of these failures that eventually turn into successes. But what happened with the Relentless Raven, it was one of our newest pivots in the company, which is we wanted to create a unique stays that basically told the story of post-COVID travel. So post-COVID travel is a little bit rebellious, people going away from the metro areas, looking to reconnect with nature, looking to be out in these, off the beaten paths when they're traveling. A lot of them these locations that were popping up during COVID as stars were drivable. So that was another big thing that we were looking at. How do we tap into this market and this movement? And so we decided to go after the tiny house or unique stays market, which includes tiny house containers, boat houses, things like that. And we were successful in getting some investment funds to get a tiny house purchased and put out on a piece of land. Now, where it ended up at first was in the Rio Grande area. So right off the Rio Grande, we thought we struck it because there was a tiny house community that was being advertised during the time at that time. And we thought how perfect to be around put the Raven with other tiny houses. People would love it. And on paper, we really couldn't use the same processes that we used for the other short-term, the traditional short-term rentals that we normally put out. So we had to just kind of gauge it by the nearest town. That didn't go well. And the reason that didn't go well is because we did a virtual tour of this space, just counting on the numbers that were coming out of Albuquerque, which was about 55 minutes away. We were betting on that we could get some traffic and that it was unique and we could get some traffic from Albuquerque. But the problem was that once we got there, this particular tiny house community had been a trailer park before that. And yes, they were in transition of being a tiny house community, but they were not completely there. So before a guest could get to the Relentless Raven, they had to drive through the old part of the trailer park and then eventually end up at the space that the Relentless Raven was in. That didn't work for us. It didn't work for our guests. So we had to pivot out of there and we found a beautiful space now right outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's right at the foothills of the Rockies. And it is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It has a farm on it, Indian ruins certified, 30 acres, just beautiful. And what makes the Relentless Raven so special, and you'll see it in the reviews as well, is that it was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, you know? And so the decor is inspired by that. The tiny house itself, we actually took the time out to write a little story. You know, before we even stood it up, we wanted it to tell a story. And the story that it tells is it tells pretty much a moody, you know, someone with writer's block looking to unplug and get their spark back in life. And what they're doing is you come in there, you see a lot of literature, you see a lot of books, a lot of interesting books when you walk into the Relentless Raven. You see, we had special wallpaper made that has facts about the Raven and Edgar Allan Poe, all written into the wallpaper. The same thing with the 1920s, because it was a 1920s around that time poem. We had some recipes put into wallpaper as well. So while they're there, they can actually authentically cook some 1920s recipes. So it's more of an experience as well. And so we did, I'll tell you one other thing, George, that we had to draw in and make this the star that it is we had an escape room built into it, which is under construction because it's very popular and we want to automate it. So the escape room, it basically brings in, I'm trying to think of the little codes, the QR codes. You scan a QR code, it kind of gives you a background story and it tells you where you can start finding clues. And once they find a clue, which is inside of the unit, once they find it and solve it, it sends them to the next clue until they go ahead and get through the escape room. So we're now automating that completely, and that'll be back online probably in the next week or so. But the tiny house is so special, and a lot of people really appreciate the attention to detail. It's actually very cool in that it's a Gothic theme, but it's Victorian at the same time. So it's light and dark balanced at the same time. So I can't wait to send you pictures of that if you haven't seen it. And that's garnered press attention. So it's actually got little articles. Yeah.
Well, I love the story of the Raven. It sounds like you had a kind of a rough start there with the Raven, but the Raven itself had a rough start. Got a lot of bad press at first, but I'm glad that you're getting a lot of great press on that. So just like the poem, it really took off.
Yeah, that's right. I love that. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, it became one of his most famous.
mirroring Edgar Allan Poe. He had a rough start, he
Yeah.
didn't have the best background as well, so yeah, it's one of those things where it was a slow burn, but boy, is it taking off.
Yeah, and I'd like to pivot a little bit. I mean, you talked a lot about your business and how you made it special. I mean, it is a very design-oriented business. You've gone beyond that, not just designing beautiful spaces, but really curating experiences. And you've also talked about the business side of it, right? I mean, you can't just be good at design and do well at this. You've got to truly understand the business end of things, or it'll sink you. And I think, considering where it looks like the economy is headed, there's probably never been a better time to be serious on the business end. Now, I wonder if you want to share with us anything you're seeing maybe on the macroeconomic landscape, or maybe in terms of your knowledge of real estate, where you think things are headed next for these short-term rentals. I mean, they've had a great run so far.
I'll tell you the thing that, and I've said this before, and I have some examples that this is, really came to fruition, is that I think in general with short-term rentals, you have to be careful with building out in a single area. That's number one, because a lot of people have gotten comfortable with building out in their backyard and things like that. And the reason why that's such an issue that you should pay attention to nowadays is because laws are catching up with short-term rentals. Regulations are catching up with short-term rentals. They're becoming more regulated now, and that's not a bad thing. That's necessary. But what it does is, if those regulations aren't in favor of the empire you built in your backyard with a short-term rental, you've now just put all your eggs in one basket and you won't have really anywhere to pivot. So I would say the thing that going forward, if you're looking at being in this business, get used to putting together processes and systems that allow you to operate in other areas, because it's just like stocks, in that you don't want to put all your, your eggs in one basket. It's very risky to do that. And I say that with short-term rentals as well. Pay attention that regulations are catching up with short-term rentals. They're no longer like a wild, wild west type of, landscape for us to operate off of. If you just have a phone and internet, you can throw something up that you're sitting in and be off and running. It's not, it's moving away from that. So I would say, again, pay attention to regulation. Then another thing that kind of piggybacks off of that, and I'll tell you, George, is that start looking at these type of spaces. Like right now, I'm looking at flotels, which is a floating hotel. It's a floating container. Because of the regulations, I'm looking at how can I take a slip of water, a slip, and make that into the package that I need for investors to invest into, because a lot of times it helps me get around some kind of restriction in that area. Specifically, like I was looking at Miami. Miami is not short-term rental friendly. It's hotel friendly, it's resort friendly, it's big business friendly, but it's not small short-term rental business friendly. And so some of the ways I was looking at getting around that was, again, going into those areas that nobody really is competing for. How do we take it to the water? How do we take it to, some of the lands that are right outside of the busy Miami area, but still get enough travelers, things like that. So I would say that you got to start thinking outside of the box once we go forward with short-term rentals, and specifically where the economy is going. I'll tell you, a lot of people say, oh, I found a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities overlooked in short-term rentals, but it's also getting more difficult to get them more in a traditional way. So when I say that, I do sourcing all the time for property and opportunity, and I'm finding that those are harder. Traditional units are harder to negotiate now because there's stiff competition, inflation is up, rental prices is up, property prices is up. It's hard to get that unit at a price point where you're stepping into it knowing that you're going to make a good return on it. That's where you make your return, is how you contract it up front. If you don't contract it right up front, you're really going to, shoot yourself in the foot later on when you're looking for major returns.
Great. And I want to go a little deeper into the business model.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these viewers here and our listeners, they're in multifamily real estate or commercial real estate. And I think most of our listeners are probably not in single family rentals, but may look at short-term rentals like, wow, that's the way to do it. I mean, if I'm going to buy a single unit, I want to do a short-term rental. And when you're in commercial real estate, you tend to think in terms of net operating income. You can value your building on net operating income, but what you got at the end of the day is essentially a single family home. So you might be able to charge, if you run things properly, who knows, maybe twice as much as an ordinary landlord. You're working a lot harder for that, by the way. You're earning that extra money, but you can't necessarily sell it on the basis of that. One of the issues or one of the hurdles you're going to have is the appraisal. So you might have something that's running twice as good as your neighbor, but it doesn't necessarily appraise for twice as much. So when it comes time to sell, how do you handle that?
So we'll tell, and I love that question as well. When you're looking at it, I always ask, potential investors when they say, we talk about exit plans and things like that, to look at the short-term rental business as the plus of it and not look at it, what it's going to sell it from the perspective that you're probably normally used to. And I'll try to explain that. When you get your short-term rental up and you get a solid portfolio behind it, you want to put lots of effort into building a solid portfolio and being able to show evidence of that. You're now selling a business. You're not necessarily selling a traditional real estate asset. And so that's the way that we like to move short-term rentals, not necessarily through the traditional means. You want to go through those opportunities or investor opportunists who are looking for, how can I obtain a cash flowing business? Yes, it's an alternative real estate asset, but in the end, you will do a lot better if you build that portfolio, make it solid, and sell that as a business. And that's usually what we do. We say, if you're looking to get out of it, what you're wanting to get out of it from a short-term rental perspective and not just another traditional real estate asset.
Exactly. So you know your audience and you know who you're selling to, and you can sell that. And yes, you are really buying an operating business, and way cool, just way cool. It's something that's always I found enticing. I wish I felt that I had the design sense to go into that and make one of those just amazing spaces.
Oh,
just
you don't need it. There's so many designers out here waiting for the short-term rental opportunities to show up and so they can show their stuff. So you don't have any problem with that. I don't think that would be a problem for you at all.
You can outsource that if you have to.
You can outsource that all day long. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I just love the idea of those QR codes. I hope that turns out just as well as you expect it will, and I think it will. I've yet to go to a curated experience like that. Although many years ago, maybe 20, my wife took me to a Sherlock Holmes themed bed and breakfast. And that was very interesting. That was before the internet made these sorts of opportunities popular. But it's amazing when you have an experience like that it can stick with you decades later. I forgot the other beds and breakfasts we went to. I just know they had Victorian architecture and watch out that you don't knock anything over. It's really expensive, but seriously, those truly curated experiences can stick with you for a very long time. All right. Well, I'm tempted to ask you questions about the potential demise of the hotel industry and how long of a runway we have with Airbnb, but I gather it's quite a while. If you're ready, maybe we can just head into our lightning round.
Okay. All right.
All right. Tell us something about one of your real estate markets that most people would not know.
New Orleans is one of the toughest markets you'll be able to, one of the most successful markets there is out there. Even though they have all of these issues with natural disasters that come around every year, it's one of the most successful markets you can get in, but also one of the toughest one, legislative and zoning wise. So a lot of people don't know that. They're interested in that, but that's a tough market to get in, but so well worth it once you find the right zoned unit.
Makes sense. I'm from Detroit, and it's not neighborhood by neighborhood, it's street by street that you really have to know it. And so some of those tough markets, if you have that local knowledge, you can really do well.
Yeah.
What is some advice that you would give your younger self?
Okay, so advice I would give to my younger self, not to be afraid of failing. I've learned some of my best lessons through failing, and try to fail as fast as you can. You get that lesson as quickly as can and keep going. Don't be afraid of failures. Actually, they can be your best friend. So I would tell my younger self that.
What is the best real estate advice you've ever received, or what is the real estate advice you'd like to give our audience?
I think it's one of the most recession-proof investment vehicles out here, and I don't think that'll ever change. Another thing that I would say that I've had to learn even recently again is that no matter where you are in real estate, location, location, location. We've tried to get away from, maybe creating something this or that, but it still comes down to location is what you have to pay attention to. It's still king. In all situations. I have not been able to get away from that. So I would say that is another one, advice.
Okay, well, I would say real estate is also, if there's any field that's full of bad advice,
Yes,
this is it.
Yes.
So is there any bad advice that you hear going around, or any missteps that you'd like to help other people avoid?
Not necessarily bad advice, but not confirming that you really need to educate yourself when you come into real estate, because the mistakes can be very costly. That really education is up there. Just you talking to someone, or I've seen this or I've seen that. That doesn't mean that you're ready to jump into a real estate deal. Not that you should shy away from them, but you should take the time out to educate yourself on the language, like the lingo and what makes that run, and the bigger picture and things like that. So actually I'll tell you the truth, George, I learned that by starting to read about syndication and how it's protections there from people that don't understand investment. And I can understand why that's there. So I would say advice that I hear is just go out there and do it without actually getting a little bit of education or the right type of mentorship. You could really get yourself into a jam, sometime a legal jam. And I've seen that legal jam, and it's hard to get out of that,
Perfect. And so timely as it appears we are about to get our Q2 economic results. If it's negative, we all know what that means. It means we are already in recession. So very timely. So yes, we always say location, location, location in real estate, but perhaps we could add to that timing. So watch out, especially if you're new. If this is your first rodeo, you might want to double down on the education and partnering at this time.
That's right.
All right. So this is the part of the show where we give a nod to the randomness of the universe. And I have some question cards here. So even I don't know what I'm going to ask you next. So just tell me when to stop cutting the deck. And I'm going to ask you what's ever on the top.
Okay. Stop. Okay.
What 3 adjectives would your family use to describe you?
They would. I don't even know if passionate is an adjective, though.
Okay, I think it counts.
I don't know if that's an adjective, but let's see. Oh, that's a hard question to keep it to the.
I told you this is the rough and tumble of the Foundry interview. There are no softballs here.
Yeah, they would just tell me that I'm probably passionate, if that is one, and also hard-headed. Hard-headed. When it comes to people telling me don't look into this or don't look into that, I like to go to where there's an unbeaten path. I like to get into things that don't always have the answers and figure that out myself.
I love it. We've clearly got that entrepreneurial spirit. You're somebody who's not going to let anyone tell you can't do it. No. And that's got to be look, if it was easy, right, everybody would be an entrepreneur, right? Yeah. All right. And how about giving us a book that has helped to forge you as an entrepreneur and as a leader?
I like the Miracle Morning. I like that one. Mm-hmm. There's another one I'm trying to think of. It was about building habits. And I read it a long time ago, but it was so good. And I can't think of the name of it. but it was a book about building habits upon habits to help you be successful. And it wasn't anything major. I like books that don't tell you to make drastic major life changes, just little tiny changes that will change the way, you know, your life goes, how early you get up in the morning. And this other one was about habit stacking, and I cannot think of the name of the book, but it basically was saying that you create, you know, your triggers, you create the life that you want to live by even your environment. You want to drink more water, put water in your room, you know, make it accessible. So it's little things like that that I really like. And I'm trying to think of any other ones. Those are the main ones that stand out to me. But you know, a lot of people like Good Dad, you know, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I've read that as well, and I think those are staples for us. But yeah, I would say I'm someone who likes those little change, these small things. I make my bed every single morning. I think that's a military thing. I make my bed every single
All right. Yeah, I'm sure you must have read Make Your Bed by Admiral McRaven.
Yeah, there you go.
That one. That's a great one. One of my favorites. Love it.
Yeah, you know, I love those type of books. So not one, but just a couple different ones.
Yeah. And now I'd like to give you an opportunity to send us out with one of your favorite quotes.
I don't know who said it, but it's don't put off today what can be, or don't put off for tomorrow what can be done today. I love that, you know, that quote. It's that one. And also there was another one that, again, I'm not sure who the quotes are, but I keep these in my mind. The quote was, done is better than perfect. And I swear, like, that has been the last 10 years of my life, is that done is better than perfect. I mean, we got to get through it. And sometimes when you're in a group settings, especially when working on team, you have to push through analysis paralysis. We got to just get it done. You can always double back and improve your position. That's what they teach in the military too. You can always improve your foxhole, but you got to get it dug, you know? So yeah, I think those two are something I just keep in the back of my mind.
All right, so I don't always go quote for quote, but this week's quote on the Entrepreneurial Minute is also going to be a military quote from Sun Tzu. And it is, thus as we have heard of blundering swiftness in war, we have not yet heard of the clever operation, which was prolonged.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I'm going to look that one up actually.
Yeah, Sun Tzu is amazing. So I think we're going to do a series on him. At least the next 10 weeks, I want to feature that amazing military mind. But more importantly, I want to thank you, Tamara. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate your insights. And I just love the amazing designs that you shown us and described us, and all of the amazing press attention that your work has rightfully garnered. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, George. I appreciate you having me. And I appreciate everything you're doing out here for us entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
All right. You take care.